Hello, everybody. This is Pastor Willie, and this is the encouraging word for today. God is so powerful that he can turn what Satan intends for evil, for bad. God can turn it into good, can use what Satan has tried to do and totally turn it around for your good and for the good of others. I think of the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. His older brothers hated him because the father showed preference to him, and they got jealous. Jealousy is a sign of Satan at work. And so they beat him up. They wanted to kill him. They threw him in a deep hole in the ground. And finally, they sold him as a slave to Egypt. He was taken away from his family as a young man and lived as a slave. Then he was working for one of his owners, and the owner's wife falsely accused Joseph of trying to sleep with her. She lied. Another sign of Satan at work. And so Joseph ends up in prison. But in prison, he meets a servant of the king, Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world, all the resources in the world. That servant is released, and when a time comes where they need Joseph's skills, he remembers Joseph, tells the king has him released. Joseph solves the problem, and he promotes Joseph to the second highest in the kingdom. And he's given all kinds of honor, money, wealth, everything, power. Meantime, his family is starving and dying of starvation. His father and his brothers. And they come to Egypt, where Joseph has made this plan to provide for people during the famine. They come and they start receiving food from Joseph. And to cut to the end, Joseph saves their lives and the lives of all of God's people. And finally, Joseph in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, has this insight. And he says this to his brothers: "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Did you catch that? Satan intended it for evil, but God turned it into good. Amazing. Amazing what God can do. Now, it took a long period of time, but finally Joseph had that understanding that God turns what Satan intends for evil into good. And if you believe that in your life, and it's true, and you believe it, something powerful is released in you and through you. And that brings us to Peter in 1 Peter 3:15. This is what Peter says: "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the reason for the hope you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." The context, what's going on in that situation, is Peter is talking about suffering. Suffering because you're a follower of Jesus. And the people he was talking to were being persecuted. Family members were being killed. They were suffering big time. So the context is suffering. Suffering for doing good. And in the midst of that suffering, they have hope. And when you're suffering and you still have hope, people take notice. They do a double take. Why does this person have hope in the situation that they're in? Yes, they're suffering, but I see hope, and they're hopeful. God has turned the suffering into something good because they have hope, and people see the hope. I think of 1 Thessalonians 4:13, where it says, we do not grieve like others who have no hope. So we suffer when someone we love dies. We suffer horribly. We cry, breaks our heart, rips our heart out. But for a follower of Jesus, we have hope. That makes all the difference in the world. When people see that, look what just happened to that person. But I see that they have hope. What's going on? When you suffer but have hope in Christ, people take notice. It's powerful. Look at that verse again. He says, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. I mean, you always have Christ in your heart. No matter good times, bad times, He's there. He's the Lord. You're submitted. You're surrendered to Him. Then He says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you the reason for the hope that you have. But do it, of course, with gentleness and respect. So when people see you having hope in a terrible situation, whether it's grief, whether it's some other type of loss, whether it's not having enough provision, but they see you have hope, they say, why do you still have hope? I know your situation. I'm familiar with your situation. Can you tell me why you have hope? So be prepared to tell them the reason you have hope. And the reason is Jesus Christ. Because He can turn any suffering I'm going through into good. And I know He's going to do it. That gives me overflowing hope. And when people see that, you become powerful. So my friends, God bless you. And I will see you again tomorrow. God bless.